It only took 5 seconds to humiliate him, and exactly 6 minutes to make the entire airline system freeze. She didn't pull him aside. She didn't lower her voice. She tore the boarding pass in half, right in front of everyone. "You don't belong here," Barbara Stone said, loud and cold. The gate went silent. A woman clutched her purse tighter. A businessman holding a coffee muttered, "Whoa." Kiran Malik didn't move. Just 12 years old, pale-faced, wearing a plain gray hoodie and a backpack worn at the edges. He stood at gate 22 like a statue, his first-class ticket fluttering to the floor in 2 broken halves. "Tell us where you're watching from. Because in 6 minutes, 31 airports will halt boarding, $1.2 billion will lock, and every person watching this quiet boy will rethink what power looks like." Barbara's smile was long gone. Her name tag caught the morning sun as she pointed down the terminal. "You'll be sitting in economy, sir. This seat's reserved for priority guests." "I have a paid first-class ticket," Kiran replied, voice even. "My grandfather booked it." "Back of the plane," she snapped. He bent slowly, picked up the torn ticket, and placed the halves gently in his hoodie pocket. No anger, no tears. The man behind him in line looked up from his tablet. A woman nearby pulled out her phone, quietly tapping record. Kiran didn't look at them. He just nodded once and followed Barbara as she motioned toward economy like he was some mistake to be corrected. But none of them knew what sat in his left pocket. A digital badge with final override credentials, a piece of his late grandfather's legacy, and the key to something no one on that plane had ever seen activated before: Whiteout protocol. He didn't shout. He didn't explain. He simply sat down and opened the app. The flight crew had made their judgment. But the system, it was about to speak for itself. Long before that ticket was torn, Kiran already knew how fragile respect could be. He'd seen it in how people talked over him, not to him, in how they'd glance at his age and stop listening. That's why his grandfather taught him early. Dignity isn't something you ask for, it's something you carry. Back home in Boulder, Colorado, their house sat quiet on the edge of a canyon ridge, windy, sun-drenched, and always filled with books. The study still smelled faintly of cedar and ink. On most days after school, Kiran would sit in that room, legs curled under him on the old leather chair, while his grandfather, Dr. Omar Malik, pored over ethics audits, policy papers, and aviation law. He didn't speak much, the old man. But when he did, Kiran listened like it was gospel. "You don't need to be the loudest," he'd say, handing over a briefing memo from the FAA. "You just need to know when silence hits harder." Weeks before this flight, just before his health took a final turn, Omar had pressed a slim gray access card into Kiran's palm. "It's not a toy," he warned. "This grants temporary override access to Sky Audit Corps, delegate level. If something goes wrong, and only if it's wrong, you'll know what to do." Kiran had nodded, not because he fully understood, but because the weight of the moment wrapped around him like armor. The card came with a sealed envelope, 6 digits handwritten in blue ink, the final authentication for something his grandfather never fully explained, only called Whiteout. He hadn't told anyone, not his teachers, not even his grandmother. It wasn't about showing off. Omar had taught him better than that. It was about stewardship, quiet responsibility. Now, sitting in seat 36B, surrounded by strangers and stripped of his place, Kiran slid a hand into his pocket and felt the ridges of the card against his fingers. This wasn't about getting his seat back. It was about proving something his grandfather always believed, that even the quietest voice could echo through the entire system if you chose the right moment to speak. He didn't fight her. When Barbara Stone placed a hand near his shoulder, gesturing down the aisle, Kiran rose without a word. His first-class seat, row 2A, sat there like a spotlight that had been switched off. He didn't look back. The walk to the rear of the plane felt longer than the runway itself. Passengers leaned away as he passed, pretending to fidget with seatbelts or check emails. No one made eye contact. Not even the businessman who'd muttered, "Is that allowed?" a minute earlier. Barbara kept her voice low but firm. "Seat 36B, you'll find it in the middle." It was the last row before the bathrooms. Kieran stepped into the tight space between two adults already seated, offered a quiet, "Excuse me," and folded himself into the narrow middle seat. No armrest, no tray table that worked properly, no window. The older man to his left didn't move an inch. The woman on his right gave a tight-lipped smile, then turned back to her crossword. Kieran stared straight ahead. He felt the torn ticket edges inside his pocket, pressing lightly against his thigh. In first class, there had been light, wide windows, warm tones, soft voices. Back here, the cabin was colder. No one asked if he needed anything. No one noticed he was still clutching the strap of his backpack like a lifeline. But the silence didn't bother him. He remembered what his grandfather used to say whenever someone dismissed his work or tried to ignore him during meetings. They don't have to respect you out loud. Just make sure they regret it quietly. Kieran pulled his hoodie sleeves down and tucked his elbows close. His thumb grazed the edge of the Sky audit card again. They could move him. They could tear the ticket. But what Barbara Stone had just done wasn't just rude. It was a registered ethics breach. And whether she knew it or not, the system that Omar Malik built was watching, and it was about to respond. The seatbelt light blinked on, and the flight attendants moved briskly down the aisle. One offered juice to the row ahead of him. No one made eye contact with the boy in 36B. Kieran didn't touch the tray. He just reached into the inside pocket of his backpack and pulled out a small, fabric-wrapped bundle. Inside was the card. Slate gray. No logo. Just a simple gold-etched phrase. Sky Audit Delegate Access. His fingers trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from weight. Not physical, but moral. He remembered the night his grandfather handed it to him. Not everyone should have access to Whiteout, Omar Malik had said. But some situations, they leave you no choice. Kieran unwrapped the card, slid it into the reader port on his tablet, and watched the screen flicker. A new interface opened, one he'd never seen before. Emergency Delegate Protocol, a blinking cursor prompted him. Authenticate to escalate breach? He tapped yes, then took a breath and opened the encrypted call app. "Grandma," he whispered as the screen connected. "I need your help." Her face appeared within seconds, warm but alert. "I'm listening." He didn't raise his voice, just explained, one sentence at a time, what Barbara Stone had done, how the seat was revoked without cause, how it fit within the breach parameters his grandfather once described. She didn't ask questions, she simply nodded. "Use the code, Kieran," she said quietly. "This is what it was for." Kieran swallowed, then pulled out the envelope. 6 digits in blue ink stared back at him. He typed each one carefully. 2, 8, 9, 4, 6, 1. The system didn't beep. It didn't flash. It simply accepted. Whiteout protocol, armed. He sat back, staring at the words. He hadn't done it out of anger. He wasn't trying to punish. But some lines, when crossed, meant the system needed to speak louder than he ever could, and now it would. At first, nothing happened. No sounds, no blinking lights, no dramatic announcement. Just the soft hum of the engine, the clink of plastic cups, the low murmur of passengers settling in. But exactly 6 minutes after Kieran entered the 6-digit override, things began to shift. It started in the cockpit. The pilot's console flashed a quiet notification. Ethics alert, level 4, pending protocol lockdown. At gate 22, the boarding screen for the next flight froze mid-check-in. The agent tapped twice, frowned, and called a supervisor. By the time Flight 4582 reached cruising altitude, 31 airports had begun experiencing sudden delays. Not weather-related, not mechanical. Operational ethics lock engaged. Across the country, Chicago, Denver, Seattle, Atlanta, Gate assignments disappeared from displays. Mobile apps stopped showing boarding zones. At least 4 major airlines received identical FAA alerts. Sky audit clearance suspended pending Whiteout review. Inside the cabin of 4582, Barbara Stone glanced at her crew tablet. Her brow furrowed. "What does in-review clearance mean?" She whispered to Carlos, the junior attendant. Carlos shrugged. "I don't know. My screen just went blank." Passengers noticed the energy shift. A man in 5A looked around. "Why aren't we moving from the gate?" "We're airborne, sir," the attendant replied. "But my team just texted. Their flight's grounded in Denver. Ethics system failure." The whispers started. A few turned into quiet gasps. Then someone pulled up a news alert. "Breaking. Major U.S. airports enter ethics lockdown after alleged breach involving minor passenger." Barbara went pale. She turned around slowly, scanning the cabin. Then she saw him, Kieran, sitting straight, eyes forward, not smiling, not moving. Her mouth opened like she might say something, but there was nothing left to say. Because the system she'd assumed was blind, it had just blinked, wide awake, and it wasn't going to look away. Barbara Stone still didn't know who he was. To her, he was just another kid flying alone, just another name on a printed boarding pass, just someone easy to move when things got inconvenient. She hadn't read the override notice from Central Dispatch. Her interface had timed out before the data pushed through. She didn't know the boy in 36B had a last name that once shook Senate hearings, or that the man who raised him was Dr. Omar Malik, the architect of the very sky audit system now shutting down gates across the country. She didn't know that by invoking Whiteout, Kieran had triggered the final defense built into his grandfather's legacy. A live ethics lockdown designed to freeze operations until a human dignity audit could be conducted. But others did. At FAA headquarters, a blinking alert flashed red across the compliance wall. Whiteout protocol confirmed. Initiator K. Malik, Delegate ID, number 4271. Within minutes, Deputy Director Angela Kim stood up from her desk. "Get legal, get operations, get the secretary on the line. Now!" By the time Barbara finally reached the front of the aircraft to speak with the captain, he already had the alert on his screen. His face was tight, voice low. "This flight is under review," he told her. "We follow protocol, no further passenger interactions." Barbara blinked. "Wait, he flagged us?" The captain didn't answer. He just tapped the screen, showing her the delegate ID. K. Malik. Her lips parted slightly. She remembered the name now. The Senate hearings, the ethics overhaul. That photo, an old man holding a young boy's hand on the steps of Capitol Hill. That was him. That's who was sitting in seat 36B, not just a boy, but the one person in the entire country who had the legal, ethical, and personal authority to pull the emergency brake. On her, the airline, and anyone who thought a quiet kid couldn't cause a storm. And she had given him every reason to use it. The news didn't wait for landing. Somewhere between Kansas airspace and the edge of Nevada, a ping vibrated through devices on the flight, then another, and another. Even with airplane mode technically engaged, people were still getting through. One man near the front had Wi-Fi from the airline's premium package. He refreshed his feed. "Whoa," he muttered, eyes glued to his phone. "Guys, this kid shut down Sky Audit." A woman 2 rows behind leaned forward. "What do you mean, shut down?" He tilted the screen so she could see the headline. "Breaking, 12-year-old triggers nationwide ethics lockdown. Airline faces 1.2B freeze." The article had photos, not of Kieran but of his grandfather, Dr. Omar Malik, and a quote from years ago. "If the system ever forgets what human dignity looks like, it should be stopped cold." The passengers around them began whispering. Some connected the dots. The quiet kid in the back, the sudden delay, the alerts on the crew's tablets. The man in 2D stood up and turned to look toward the back. He didn't speak, just observed. Watching the small figure in 36B sitting still, hands folded in his lap. He looked calm, not smug, not proud, just sure. Barbara passed down the aisle, slower now. She could feel it. The air had changed. Not because of turbulence, not because of altitude, but because they all knew. This wasn't just a kid who got bumped from a seat. This was a child who had access to the one system no airline wanted triggered. A system designed to freeze financial pipelines, halt unethical operations, and demand a federal ethics review. And now everyone on board, flight attendants, passengers, even the pilots, realized they were part of something bigger than a seat change. They were flying through a story, and the headline was being written in real time by a boy who never raised his voice. By the time the plane began its descent into San Francisco, no one was watching the clouds. Eyes weren't out the window. They were on Kieran. Barbara hadn't said a word in nearly 30 minutes. The crew had stopped smiling. Even the usual "we'll be landing shortly" announcement came through the intercom with a different tone. Tight, uncertain. The captain's voice, when it came on, was direct. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been asked to taxi to a private gate. Do not disembark until instructed. FAA representatives will be boarding momentarily." Passengers exchanged looks. A few reached for their phones. The man from 5A muttered, "I've been flying 20 years. Never seen this." As the wheels touched down, Kieran remained still. He didn't look out the window, didn't flinch at the bumps. He already knew what was waiting. At Gate 43B, 2 black SUVs were parked beside the jet bridge. A third vehicle, unmarked, had tinted windows and government plates. The jet bridge extended slower than usual. Every sound felt heavier. Then, the door opened. 3 federal officers stepped in. Not TSA, not police. FAA Compliance Division. One of them held a digital pad. He nodded toward the front. "Flight crew, remain in place. We need to speak with a passenger seated in 36B. Barbara's face drained of color. Passengers parted like water. Some stood. Some sat back, unsure whether to make space or disappear. Kieran stood up on his own. He didn't rush. He didn't look back. Just walked forward, past the same passengers who hadn't spoken up earlier. As he reached the front galley, the lead officer offered a gentle nod. "We've been briefed, Mr. Malik. Your action was recorded. We appreciate your discretion." Kieran gave a small nod. "It wasn't personal." "I know," the officer replied. "That's why it worked." Barbara stood frozen by the beverage cart, one hand still resting on a napkin tray. For the first time that day, she realized he never raised his voice. But somehow, he was the loudest one in the room. Less than 3 hours after Kieran stepped off Flight 4582, the entire C-suite of Crestfall Airlines sat around a walnut conference table in downtown Chicago. No one was smiling. The CEO, Vernon Carlisle, adjusted his cufflink and cleared his throat. "Someone tell me why $1.2 billion in operations funds are frozen," he said, voice tight. "And why we're locked out of every sky audit portal from LAX to JFK." The compliance officer slid a report across the table. Vernon flipped through it slowly. Each page made his jaw tighter. Flight 4582. Sky audit breach. Verified Whiteout protocol. Activated initiator K. Malik. Delegate access Tier 1B. He looked up, stunned. "Malik? As in Omar Malik?" The VP of Risk gave a slow nod. "His grandson." Vernon let out a low whistle. "So we humiliated the legacy holder of the ethics system our airline depends on." "It gets worse," the COO added. "The FAA isn't just reviewing this flight. They're calling for a system-wide ethics audit, starting with us." Legal slid in. "We're facing a federal mandate. If we don't submit full behavioral logs for the last 90 days, we lose access to Sky Audit permanently." That meant grounded flights, lost partnerships, melted investor trust. "But it was just a seat mix-up," someone at the end mumbled. "No," Vernon said, voice sharper now. "It was a pattern. This wasn't the first time one of our crew made a judgment call based on appearance. It was just the first time." The wrong kid was watching. Silence. Then, "What do we do now?" Vernon looked out the window. Downtown buzzed below like nothing had happened. But inside that boardroom, the storm was just beginning. "Fix your manuals, retrain the crews, and someone call Barbara Stone," he said. "Tell her to turn in her badge." And just like that, one boy, one seat, one quiet decision had brought the most powerful people in the airline to their knees. 3 weeks later, a new bronze plaque appeared on the west side of the FAA's Washington, D.C. headquarters. It didn't say much, just a quote. "Systems may forget, people shouldn't, OM." Beneath it, smaller letters etched into the metal read, "The Malik Protocol, ratified June 18th, in honor of Delegate K. Malik, for upholding the ethics of passenger dignity." The events of Flight 4582 had sparked something bigger than a media cycle. They triggered a systemic audit of 4 major airlines. They led to $1.2 billion in transit credit freezes, grounding dozens of routes. And more than that, they forced every commercial carrier in the U.S. to sign a new federal charter, the Malik Protocol, a new standard for underage passenger protection, for nonverbal reporting rights, for silent accountability. And all because a boy in 36B decided to make one quiet move when the world wasn't looking. Kieran never gave an interview. He never posted about it, never even responded to the thousands of emails that flooded the Sky Audit delegate inbox. Some were angry, some were thankful, some were just confused. He read them all, but he didn't need to say anything, because the work was already speaking. At home, back in Silver Spring, Maryland, Kieran sat in his grandfather's old study one afternoon. The light came in through the slats of the wooden blinds just like it always had. The scent of paper, wood polish, and old leather still clung to the shelves. His mother brought him a cup of tea. "They're saying you'll be in the textbooks, you know." He didn't look up. "I didn't do it for that." "I know," she said softly. "You did it for him." He nodded once. The room felt full, even though it was empty. On the desk lay a single printed page, the original draft of the Whiteout Protocol, written in Omar Malik's handwriting, ink slightly faded but still clear. Kieran traced the lines of text with his finger. He remembered sitting at that desk as a kid, watching his grandfather explain ethics systems like bedtime stories. He remembered the phrase his grandfather always ended with, "Power's not about being loud, it's about being ready when it's quiet." Back at Crestfall Airlines, sweeping changes were underway. Every crew member was now required to complete Dignity First de-escalation training. A new system had been rolled out. PASS, Passenger Alert Support System, allowing any passenger, even minors, to flag treatment without confrontation. The system worked silently. It linked directly to Sky Audit. And its name? Malik Watch. The first test flight went live a month later. A boy, around Kieran's age, accidentally sat in the wrong seat on a connector route to Raleigh. The flight attendant began to raise her voice. The boy didn't argue. He simply tapped the pass icon on the screen in front of him. A soft chime played. The attendant's tablet lit up red. Within minutes, a supervisor appeared. No voices were raised. No one moved seats. No ethics breach occurred. But the system had worked before anything went wrong. And that was the point. One quiet boy, one wrong seat, one forgotten name that the world would now remember. Kieran Malik never needed revenge. He just restored something the industry forgot, that the smallest voice in the cabin can sometimes be the one that lands the plane with the most power. 2 months after Flight 4582, an anonymous post appeared on a quiet ethics forum maintained by the FAA. No photo, no bio, just a username, 36B. The post read, "I wasn't trying to start a war. I wasn't trying to be famous or punish anyone. I just wanted to sit where my grandfather told me to sit. He said, 'Don't ever let the world tell you you're too small to matter in a big system.' That day, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue, but I remembered what he built. I remembered why. We talk a lot about power, who has it, who gets to keep it. But sometimes, power is just a quiet moment when someone chooses not to look away. This isn't about one airline, or one flight, or one crew. It's about what we're willing to tolerate when we think no one's watching. If you work in this industry, thank you. But please don't forget that every time you make a choice, someone like me might be sitting there, not yelling, not tweeting, just watching and remembering. The post spread quietly. No one could confirm if it really came from Kieran Malik. The moderators didn't remove it. They pinned it. And from that moment on, in every FAA ethics training manual, just beneath the bolded Malik Protocol, one line appeared in italics. Someone like me might be sitting there. The name 36B became more than just a seat number. It became a reminder. That dignity doesn't have to shout. It just has to be awake and ready when the moment comes. It's been 6 months since Flight 4582, and yet 36B is never booked anymore. Not by mistake, not by chance, not by oversight, by choice. Crestfall Airlines, along with 4 others, issued a quiet directive. On select aircraft, one seat would remain empty, permanently unassigned. The reasoning wasn't listed in customer FAQs. It didn't need to be. Flight attendants know, pilots know. Gate agents whisper it like a superstition, half in reverence, half in respect. It's not just an empty seat, it's a symbol. At a small press event in DC, an older woman, FAA Commissioner Linda Tron, stood at the podium holding a boarding pass. It was laminated, unused. The print read, K. Malik Flight 4582, Seat 36. Her voice shook just slightly as she addressed the crowd. "We have thousands of protocols for safety," she said. "Cabin pressure, engine failure, weather threats. But this was a protocol about how we treat each other when the seatbelt sign is off, when no one's recording, when it's just human and human." She held the pass up. "From this day forward, 36B will stand as a fixed seat on every aircraft equipped with the Sky Audit system, not just as a reminder of a boy's courage, but as a warning to us all." A pause. To protect dignity, even in silence. At home, Kieran watched the broadcast, legs tucked under him on the living room couch. His mom brought him popcorn. "You okay?" He nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." She sat beside him. "You know, you changed the airline industry, right?" He shrugged. "I didn't mean to." "I know," she smiled. "But that's what makes it matter." In airports across the country, travelers now walk past new posters on jet bridges. Passenger dignity matters. If you see something, say something, or tap pass. And just below that, in soft gray text, inspired by seat 36B. Some passengers stop and read. Some don't. But somewhere, on almost every flight, someone taps that icon on the seat screen, not because something went wrong, but just to know they can, to know they matter. And every so often, a gate agent will look down the manifest, spot a child traveling alone, and give them a special look. "You want 36B?" Sometimes the child will smile and say yes. Sometimes they won't understand. But if they ask why, the agent always says the same thing, because on one flight, a boy sat there and reminded the world how powerful quiet can be. Not a throne, not a stage, not a spotlight, just a seat. But now, a seat no one dares move again. If you've ever been made to feel small, unseen, or like you didn't belong, what would you have done if you were sitting in 36B? Tell us where you're watching from, and let us know. Would you have stayed quiet or tapped that screen?